There are things we do in silence that never stop screaming inside us. She signed the divorce papers with steady hands, but her hands hadn't been steady since. He never asked where she went. He never knew what she was carrying when she left. Some secrets don't destroy people immediately. They take their time. Seoul in winter doesn't apologize for being cold. The city just keeps moving. Neon lights bleeding into the wet pavement. Strangers brushing past strangers without a word. The sky pressing down low and gray like it has something heavy it needs to say, but doesn't know how. Imara had been in Seoul for 11 months. Not long enough to feel at home. Long enough to stop feeling like a stranger. She worked at a private cultural consultancy in Gangnam, a small, quiet firm that connected African artists with Korean galleries. The work was honest, clean. Nothing that asked her to look over her shoulder. That mattered to her more than she had ever admitted out loud. She was good at the job because she was good at reading people. She always had been. What she was not good at, what she had never been able to master, was knowing when to leave a room before the wrong person walked into it. The night she met Do-yeon, she almost didn't go. A colleague had invited her to a private exhibition opening in Itaewon, a luxury gallery, Korean contemporary art, champagne in tall glasses, people who wore their wealth the way most people wear skin, without thinking about it. Imara didn't particularly enjoy those rooms. She always felt the particular exhaustion of being the most visibly foreign person present, the quiet effort of existing with grace in a space not built with her in mind. But she went. She told herself it was networking. She knew, on some level, it was loneliness. The specific kind that doesn't announce itself. It just sits beside you in a cab and stands a little too close in an elevator and makes you accept invitations you would otherwise decline. She noticed him before she understood why. He was standing near the far wall, alone in the way that powerful people are alone, surrounded by space that other people instinctively leave around them. He wasn't performing conversation. He wasn't working the room. He was simply present, which somehow commanded more attention than anything deliberate. Tall, quiet, still, dark suit, no tie. The kind of face that looked like it had been arranged by someone with patience, not conventionally soft, but precise. Strong jaw, eyes that moved slowly across the room, taking stock of everything without appearing to look at anything. He wasn't watching her. She noticed him anyway. She turned away. She turned, accepted a glass of champagne she didn't intend to finish, made conversation with a curator she had met twice before, did everything that a woman who was not curious about the man by the far wall would do. And then, somehow, she was standing in front of a large canvas, abstract, deep charcoal with a single slash of warm amber across the center, and he was standing beside her. Neither of them had made a decision that could be named. They had simply arrived at the same point. "It looks like something trying to remember what warmth felt like," she said. She hadn't meant to speak. It came out quietly, more to herself than to anyone. A pause, or something that already gave up trying, he said. His voice was low, measured. Korean accent softened slightly by what sounded like years of something. Travel, maybe, or careful listening. She looked at him then. He was already looking at the painting. "That's a bleaker reading," she said. "Probably," he said. "I tend toward bleak." She didn't respond immediately. There was something disarming about that. The absence of performance, the way he said it without self-pity or invitation. Just fact. She had met many people who offered honesty as theater. This didn't feel like that. "Imara," she said. A beat. "Do-yeon." He didn't ask what she did. He didn't ask where she was from in the particular way that question sometimes lands like a displacement notice. He asked her what she thought the amber slash represented, and she told him. And he disagreed, quietly, thoughtfully. And she found herself disagreeing back. And somewhere in the disagreement, something loosened in her chest that had been held tight for longer than she could account for. They talked for nearly an hour. About art, about soul, about what it means to feel at home somewhere you were not born, about the difference between solitude chosen and solitude arrived at by accident. He was careful with his words. There were pauses between his sentences that didn't feel empty. They felt considered, like he was giving each word permission before it left his mouth. She noticed he drank nothing, that he watched the room the way someone does when they are not simply attending a gathering, when attendance itself is something with weight. She noticed the two men who remained, always, at a distance that was too consistent to be casual. She noticed, and she let herself not name what she was noticing, because the conversation was the kind she hadn't had in a long time, and she was not ready for it to become something with edges. At the end of the evening, he asked if he could see her again, not with urgency, not with the particular forward lean that turns a question into an expectation. He asked it the way he said everything, quietly, leaving real room for no. She should have said no. She knew enough by then, in the accumulated way of small observations, to know that this man did not belong to an ordinary world, that the stillness around him was not peace but something more controlled, that whatever he was outside of this gallery, outside of this conversation, was not something she should move toward. She knew. She said yes anyway. Later, she would not be able to explain it entirely. The closest she could come was this. He was the first person in Seoul who had talked to her like she was entirely real. Not an interesting presence. Not a guest. Not a curiosity. Just real. And she had been so hungry for that without knowing it. She said goodnight and walked into the cold Seoul air and told herself it was just one evening. Just a conversation. Just a man who happened to be standing beside the same painting. But she already knew his voice by heart. And she hadn't even tried to memorize it. 3 months. That was how long Imara told herself it was careful. 3 months of dinners in quiet restaurants he chose. Places with no photographs on the walls and staff who did not appear surprised to see him. 3 months of long drives through Seoul at night, when the city looked almost peaceful from inside a moving car. 3 months of conversations that went long after the food was finished and the glasses were empty. 3 months of learning the shape of him. Not the whole shape. He kept certain rooms of himself locked, and she learned not to knock. She was not naive. She understood that the locked rooms were not separate from who he was. They were central. The stillness she had admired that first evening was not tranquility. It was control. Hard-earned, carefully maintained control over something beneath the surface that she had chosen, deliberately, not to look at directly. She asked him once, only once, what he did. He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that she understood the silence as its own answer. "Things I cannot undo," he finally said. She had looked at him across the table in that low-lit restaurant and understood that she was being given something honest, and that the honest thing was a warning, and that she was going to stay at the table anyway. She stayed. The night everything shifted, they were at his apartment. She had been there before, but always briefly, a drink before a dinner, picking something up. His apartment was the opposite of what she might have imagined for a man like him. It was calm, spare, books she hadn't expected, Korean history, French philosophy, architecture. A single plant she found both improbable and oddly moving. That night, there was a storm. Not a dramatic one. Seoul doesn't always announce itself. It was the slow, persistent kind of rain that makes going outside feel impossible, that turns a room into its own complete world. He had cooked, which surprised her. Simply, carefully. They ate at the low table by the window and watched the rain and talked very little, the way people talk when they've run out of need to fill silence. She doesn't remember who moved first. She would think about that later. In airports, in hospital rooms, in the quiet of a city she fled to, and she genuinely could not reconstruct it. The moment happened the way certain true things happen, without announcement, without a clearly identifiable beginning. What she remembered was this: his hand against her face, careful, almost tentative, which was not what she expected from him. Not performance of tenderness, but real hesitation, the kind that comes from wanting something enough to be afraid of it. She remembered the rain. She remembered how quiet everything was. She remembered thinking, with the part of her brain that was still watching, "This is the line, and I am crossing it, and I am..." Afterward, they lay in the dark, and he was quiet in a different way than his usual quiet. It was softer, less controlled, like something had been set down that he usually carried. She turned to look at him in the low light, and there was something on his face she had not seen before. Something unguarded. "Imara," he said. Just her name. Nothing attached. But the way he said it, the specific weight of it, the way it sat in his mouth like it had always been there, that was enough. She understood that she loved him. She understood it fully, clearly, and with the particular grief of understanding it in the same moment as understanding that it would not be simple. That love, for him, was not a clean country. That whatever future existed inside this feeling would be built on complicated ground. She loved him anyway. You cannot always choose the timing of truth, but the weeks that followed the storm were also when she began to see more. Nights when he disappeared without explanation and returned in the early hours with something careful and closed in his expression. Conversations that stopped abruptly when his phone rang. Men around him whose eyes moved like security cameras. A name, Han Do-yeon, spoken in hushed particular tones by people who didn't know she could hear. She began to understand the architecture of what he was. Not pieces. The whole building. And the building was dark. The night he proposed, if it could be called that, it was quiet, unornamented, almost accidental. She said yes, without letting herself think. She said yes because she loved him. She said yes, knowing it was complicated. She said yes, and believed that love, sometimes, is enough to stand on. She was wrong about that, but not yet. The marriage was private, a civil ceremony, small, no celebration that announced itself. Do-yeon was not a man who performed his private life, and for a season, a brief, real, irreplaceable season, they were happy. Not loudly, not perfectly, but genuinely. She made a home inside their life together, and she did not look too hard at the locked rooms, and she told herself this was not denial. It was choice. And some mornings she believed it entirely. Some mornings she stood in the kitchen and he stood behind her, and they were just two people who had found each other. And it was enough. It didn't last. It couldn't. The things Do-yeon was part of did not permit lasting happiness as a permanent condition. They permitted it only as a mercy before the reckoning. The unraveling was slow at first, and then all at once. A rival faction. Violence she was not supposed to know about but came close enough to touch. A night she spent alone in the apartment waiting for him while sirens moved through the city. Pressing her hands flat against the cold window glass and bargaining with a silence that didn't answer. The distance between them grew in the aftermath. Not anger. Something quieter and worse. Like they were two people standing in the same room but through glass, looking at each other from a great, uncrossable distance. She asked him once to leave it. She already knew the answer before she asked. She asked anyway, because some words need to be said even when they change nothing. Even when you know, they will sink without reply. He said, "It's not something I can leave. It's something I am." She nodded. She said nothing. She understood that the man she loved and the world he belonged to could not be separated. That she had loved them both, and that both were staying. She began to understand that she was the one who would have to go. She did not tell him she was leaving. She did not tell him she was late. She bought a pregnancy test on a Tuesday morning in a pharmacy 3 neighborhoods from their apartment so no one would know. She sat on the floor of the bathroom and looked at the result, and the first thing she felt was not joy. It was terror, because she already knew what she was going to do, and it was going to break something in her that would never fully heal. The word twins came from a doctor she had never met before, a clinic far from their neighborhood. Paid in cash. She had given a false surname at the front desk, her mother's maiden name, the first dishonest thing she had done inside this marriage, and it had sat in her mouth like a stone. She was 6 weeks along. She had not slept properly in 4 days. The ultrasound technician was a quiet woman who worked in the particular focused silence of someone doing precise, careful things. She moved the probe slowly, said nothing for a long moment that felt like drowning. And then, "There are two." Imara said, "I'm sorry?" 2 heartbeats, twins. The room was very still. Imara looked at the screen. Those 2 small, impossible presences. Those 2 flickering points of light in the gray. And something happened inside her that she could not name cleanly. It was not one feeling. It was many feelings at once, layered and contradictory, the way grief and love and terror sometimes arrive together because they belong together. She thought of Doyon. She thought of his hands, the careful way he held things, like he was always aware of his own strength. She thought of the man she had seen him become when his world pressed in on him, the distance, the walls, the cold competence that moved through him like a current she could not interrupt. She thought, I cannot raise children inside that. And then, lower, quieter, the thought that would drive everything that followed. I cannot lose them to it either. She did not go home that afternoon. She sat in a cafe 3 blocks from the clinic for 2 hours. She drank tea she didn't taste. She watched people walk past the window, ordinary people, moving through ordinary afternoons. And she felt the particular anguish of being inside a decision that no ordinary language could hold. She loved him. She wanted to call him. She wanted to tell him in the kitchen of their apartment, wanted to watch his face in the moment before he composed it, wanted to believe that this impossible double miracle would be the thing that changed the calculus. But she knew him. She knew that he would not leave his world for love. He had told her, honestly, that he could not. And she had accepted it. But she had accepted it for herself, for the small possible life of 2 adults who understood the risk they were each carrying. She could not accept it for 2 small heartbeats on a gray screen that had not asked for any of this. Some choices aren't made from strength. They're made from a kind of love that has no name yet. The kind that decides, I will break before I let this break them. She went home. Doyon was not there. He was often not there by evening. She had stopped asking where. She walked through the apartment slowly. The books. The plant she had come to think of privately as theirs. The kitchen where they had stood together on ordinary mornings that she understood now, with aching clarity, had been the best mornings of her adult life. She stood in the living room for a long time. She was saying goodbye, not out loud. There are some goodbyes that cannot be spoken because speaking them would make them real in a way you are not yet equipped to survive. She packed in silence. Only what she needed. Only what was hers from before. She left his things untouched. She left one thing behind. A small glass figure he had given her early in their relationship. Something simple and clear that she had kept on the windowsill. She set it on the kitchen table. She didn't leave a note. There was nothing she could have written that would have been enough. There was nothing she could have written that would have been safe. She called her mother from the airport. Her mother answered on the second ring, the way she always had, immediately without question, as if she had been waiting. Imara. Just her name, just that, and something in Imara cracked open. She stood in the terminal, coat still on, luggage at her feet, and cried in the quiet way of someone who has held themselves together past the point of comfort and has only now, finally, found a safe place to come apart. Her mother didn't ask what happened. She didn't demand explanation. She said, "Come home." 2 words. They were enough. She landed in Accra in the early morning. Her mother was at the airport, standing at the arrivals gate exactly where she had stood when Imara left for Seoul 2 years ago. The same posture, the same patient stillness, the same absolute certainty of her presence. When Imara walked through the gate, her mother looked at her once, all of her, a full mother's look that reads everything, and opened her arms. Imara walked into them and held on. The months that followed were the hardest and the most necessary of her life. Her mother asked very few questions. She understood from long experience that some stories need time before they can be told. She made food. She kept the house warm. She asked about practical things. Doctor's appointments, vitamins, rest. Imara began to build something out of the wreckage. Slowly, carefully. The way you rebuild after a storm, not trying to restore what was, but learning the new shape of what remains. Her body changed. Her sleep was broken. Her thoughts returned to Seoul with a frequency she could not control. A smell, a sound, a quality of evening light that reminded her of those kitchen mornings. And she would have to stand still for a moment and breathe through it and then keep moving. She never called him. She changed her number. She told almost no one where she was. She disappeared from his life the way she had entered it, quietly, without announcement. She wondered, sometimes, whether he looked. She never let herself know. The twins were born in the spring, a boy and a girl. She named them privately, in the room, before she told anyone else. She held them, one in each arm, small and warm and impossibly real, and looked at their faces in the hospital light. They had his eyes, both of them. She had expected that to hurt more than it did. Instead, it landed as something softer and stranger, a kind of recognition, like they had arrived carrying a message from a life she had left, a reminder that love does not disappear simply because circumstances make it impossible. They were here. They were hers. They were also his, in blood, in bone, and he would never know. She held that knowledge quietly for a long time. It was not a comfortable knowledge. It was not a clean one. She had made the choice from a place of genuine love and genuine fear, and she did not fully regret it, and she also could not pretend it cost her nothing. Motherhood, she would discover, is not a single feeling. It is every feeling, all at once, all the time, and she was learning to hold them. She named the boy Kofi. She named the girl Sina. She would spend the next 3 years learning to raise them, learning to be enough, learning what it means to build a life not from what you hoped for, but from what you have. She did not look back, not because the past didn't matter, but because she had 2 small faces in front of her that needed her to keep looking forward. She never told them about their father, not yet. But children have a way of asking questions that parents are never fully prepared for. And there would come a day when Kofi would look at her with those particular eyes, and she would not be able to pretend any longer. 3 years after she disappeared from Seoul, a phone call came from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. The voice on the other end was not his. It was someone speaking on his behalf. Formal. Precise. "There has been an incident," the voice said. "Mr. Han is asking for you." The name after 3 years, still capable of stopping her breath. She looked at her children asleep in the next room. She held the phone against her chest. And she stood in the silence of everything she had kept secret and understood that the secret was almost over. Seoul hadn't changed. That was the first thing Imara noticed. The city still moved with the same indifferent momentum. Neon bleeding into wet pavement, strangers passing strangers without a word. She had spent 3 years building distance from this place. Now she was standing inside it again, and the distance felt like a lie she had told herself. She had come because a voice on the phone had said, "He asked for you," more than once. After 3 years of silence, after she had vanished without a word and left no way to be found, he had still said her name. She pressed that knowledge down and didn't examine it. The hospital room was quiet when she entered. He was awake. He turned toward the door slowly, the careful movement of someone managing pain. And when his eyes found her, something crossed his face that she hadn't prepared for. Not anger, not relief, recognition. The raw, unguarded kind. "Imara," he said. Just her name. The same weight it had always carried. She walked in and sat in the chair beside his bed, and neither of them spoke for a long moment. There was too much between them for easy words. 3 years of silence sitting in the room like a third person. He looked older, carved down to something more essential. But his eyes were unchanged, still reading all the way through her, still finding what she hadn't offered. "You disappeared," he said finally. "Yes. Why?" She looked at the window. Because I had to. A long pause. I looked for you. She closed her eyes briefly. She had always believed that. It was part of what she'd carried. I know, she said. She visited 4 days in a row. Each morning she told herself it was the last time. Each afternoon she was back in that chair. They talked carefully. About surfaces, about the years between. Never the full truth. She was still carrying too much of it, to be honest. But the surfaces had warmth in them, and she remembered against her will exactly why she had loved him. On the 4th day, a hospital administrator used the words ex-wife in the corridor. The phrase landed like a stone. She turned. Do-yeon was watching her. The silence stretched long and uncomfortable. During the 3 years she was gone, the paperwork had moved. Legally, the marriage she had left behind was already over. Finished without her signature, obtained through a provision for missing parties. She stood in that fluorescent corridor and grieved something she had believed she'd already finished grieving. There is no such thing as finishing grief, only intervals. She left that evening without saying goodbye, sat in the hotel room, looked at the wall, thought about Kofi and Sena asleep in Accra, their father's eyes on their faces, and felt the ground shifting beneath the secret she had been carrying for 3 years. She called her mother. I need to tell him, Imara said. Her mother was quiet for a long moment. I know, she said softly. I've always known. She sat in the dark with soul pressing through the curtains and understood that the secret had always had an expiration date. She just hadn't known until now that she had been the one keeping it alive. She went back the next morning without rehearsed words. She had tried, sitting in the dark at 5 a.m., arranging sentences in order, finding the right cadence for an impossible truth. But the moment she walked into his room and he looked at her, everything prepared dissolved. I need to tell you something, she said. And I need you not to speak until I'm finished. He set down his tea. He said nothing. From him, that was consent. She told him everything. The pharmacy, the clinic, the ultrasound technician who said there are 2 in a voice too calm for what she was delivering. The 2 hours sitting in a cafe afterward, trying to make a decision in a body still in shock, love pressing from one side and terror from the other. She told him about the airport, her mother's arms, the slow, necessary work of rebuilding. She told him about the spring morning when 2 small people entered the world, carrying his eyes on their faces. She told him their names, Kofi, Sena. The names landed in the room with weight. The air changed. He was still for a long time. She had prepared for anger, for the cold, controlled version of him that appeared under pressure. She had not prepared for what actually happened. He pressed both hands over his face. His shoulders moved. Barely, almost controlled. She understood that she was watching something she had rarely seen. Do-yeon, without his composure. When he lowered his hands, his face was not angry. It was devastated. 3 years, he said. Yes. Why are you telling me now? She thought about the real answer. Then, because I came back, and I couldn't carry it here at the same time. And because... She stopped. Because they deserve to know who their father is, even if it's complicated. And me? He said quietly. What do I deserve? The truth, she said. I'm giving it to you late. I know what that cost. I know it can't be returned. He looked at his hands. You weren't wrong to be afraid, he said. She hadn't expected that. I know what I am, he continued. I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise. A pause. But they're mine, and I've been... He stopped. She understood. He didn't need to finish. He had been nowhere. Not by choice, because she hadn't let him know. She felt the weight of that. She didn't apologize, not yet. Real apologies need more space than a hospital room. But she felt it, fully. He asked for a photograph. She found one on her phone, the 2 of them on the porch in morning light. Kofi mid-laugh. Sena looking at something off camera with an expression that was unmistakably, startlingly his. She held out the phone. He took it. He looked at it for a long time. She looked away. That moment belonged to him. "Sina," he said quietly, testing the name. "Yes." "And Kofi?" "Yes." He handed the phone back. Steady, but not without effort. "I want to meet them. When you're well. When it's safer. Is it ever going to be safer?" She had no answer for that. She left lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because the secret was finally down. Heavier because now the real question began. Not, does he know? But what happens now that he does? Chapter 6. The Reckoning and the Beginning. He came to Accra alone. No protection, no entourage. Just a man carrying everything he needed to say. The children were in the garden when he arrived. Kofi running. Sena studying an insect on the steps with quiet seriousness. Doyon stood at the gate and saw them. Imara watched it happen on his face, the moment arriving, and understood that nothing could have prepared her for this. Sena looked up, studied him, raised one small hand. He raised his in return. Same instinct, same gesture, crossing 3 years of silence. By evening, Sena was beside him on the steps, explaining the insect in urgent detail. He listened like nothing else existed. Later, alone on the porch, he told her he was leaving his world. Quietly, directionally, no performance. "I want to be their father," he said. "That's all I'm asking." "That I can work with," she said. On the last morning, Sena climbed into the chair beside him at breakfast without a word. Settled there like a decision already made. He looked at Amara over his daughter's head. She looked back. "We caused damage. We survived it. We don't know what comes next. But we're no longer pretending there's nothing here." She watched his car disappear, then went inside. To her mother's kitchen, to her children's voices, to the life she had built from the hardest choice she'd ever made. It wasn't the life she planned, but it was real. And real was more than enough. 3 months later, a letter arrived. No words inside, just a photograph. On the back, his handwriting. "It's done." She looked at her children across the room and understood the next chapter was only just beginning.